Yeah, Brian presented a pretty compelling but fast but short case for the resurrection. And even that, just that minimal facts, it's so compelling. And if you take some time to actually go through it and actually double click on a lot of the things that he kind of referenced, it's like, wow, there's something very robust about it. And so I think one thing though that, it's Good Friday and Easter coming up this week. And next week we're going to, celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. But one thing that I do want to highlight is if this is true, and it seems like the evidence points that this is true, the implications are incredible. And so that's what we're going to unpack during Easter. But before we get there, we are, this upcoming week is Passion Week. It's Good Friday. It is the kind of the highlight of the Christian calendar. And so in light of that, we're going to continue our series in the book of John, but I wanted to double click into some of those narratives in that text. And today we're going to cover a character that I think all of us are familiar with, Pilate. But before we jump into it, I did want to talk about one thing, and it's this, all right, passivity. Okay, passivity. And not sure what you think about passivity, but it's a general problem in human nature, and I think particularly in our culture and day and age. So what is passivity? I think most plainly defined, it's when you don't direct active energy to something, even when you should. And so, it's like what I do sometimes when I see the car engine light on my car, I say, I'll deal with it later. And you don't do anything about it. And you know what happens when you passively act on most things in life? It ends up being bad. And so I thought about passivity and how, man, it's so, I guess, like I struggled with it when I was younger, but I think more and more it's become prevalent in our generation, in our day and age. I thought about like all the stuff that I read about Gen Z and all that stuff and how, like, man, to make a decision versus making a decision another way, it's something that they put off in a lot of areas of their lives. So this is the first time I heard this phrase, but I don't know if you guys heard it, but situationships, this never existed back in my day. But situationships, it's how people treat dating relationships these days, where it's just an undefined relationship to avoid any of the label and commitment. But practically speaking, what do? They talk every day, they act like it, but then they just avoid the what are we conversation to label that relationship. And why? It's because, I don't know, things like fear of rejection or losing options and all the commitment. And so I think like that captures passivity. But I think more than that, a lot of scholars and cultural study have noted that this generation, like it just avoids a lot of the decision making. And I think it's because back in the day, I just didn't know what I didn't know. Like there was no internet. I had like very limited options in my life. It's just, there was no decision fatigue. It was just either blank, blank, or blank. And so life was simpler. But they were saying because of like the internet boom and all the online stuff, and then you just see everything out there in the world and all the possible options, you just feel like, oh no, like this choice, and it could be everything from a relationship to a career, to a school, to a major, to an internship, all that, it just seems fraught. Because if you make a choice, it almost feels like you're making like 99,000 unchoices, I guess. I don't know what word that is, but you're just not making that choice. And so then there's a sense of like, oh, am I going to regret this later on? And so because it's so fraught, a lot of people, what they end up doing is they just kind of put off a lot of those decisions that came, I think, a lot easier when I was younger. Because for me, I just thought the only two majors I could choose was biology or something that had to do with law, because that's just the only two careers that existed in my life. And so it was just simpler, okay? A lot of it was simpler, like my hobbies were simpler. It was just all defined by something that was local. And so I just want to say, like, I feel you. I think this passivity thing, it's harder these days because it just feels like, am I going to miss out on something if I make this decision? But that being said, I do have to say that passivity, it is a problem, especially if there's a certain thing in life that you need to make a decision on and it's important. Because you think passivity is not making a decision, but passivity is actually a decision. And it's because not making a decision means you just kind of let yourself be, I don't know, manipulated by the currents of our world and wherever that takes you. And often it takes you to places that you don't want to go. And I thought about like, I don't know, this idea of passivity in this way, like, man, someone could be very, very not passive in certain areas of their lives, but super passive in other areas of their lives. Like someone could be a type A go-getter in their career and ministry or whatever that is, but then when it comes to like family and home life and marriage, they're like a passive person. And what happens, it's that story that you see in all those movies, right? That guy that's always at work in his career, but then his marriage deteriorates, his family deteriorates. and he ends up a stranger in his own household. And so all that to say, passivity is not a neutral thing. It's not making a decision. I guess you aren't making a decision. What you end up doing is you delay that decision, but as you delay it and you choose not to take an active stance on something, especially something important, you are making a decision. And it's often a decision that you don't want to make. And that's exactly what happens to the main character in our text today, Pilate. And so with that in mind, I wanted to turn it over to you guys and give you guys some time. It's a long text, but it's that famous text that Pilate has with Jesus right before his crucifixion. I want you guys to take some time reading it and getting into Pilate's life. Because I think one thing that you'll recognize is as you kind of understand all the things that's going on in Pilate's life, you'll realize, wow, I feel really bad for him. And so I want to kind of get into that for today. So why don't we do that? I'll give you guys about 10 minutes to read, as well as discuss some of the discussion questions in the second half of your handout, and then we'll get started with our service afterwards, or the message afterwards. All right, let's gather back together. I'm sure that wasn't enough time, but all right. So you guys feel bad for him a little bit? Yeah, you feel bad for him? Hopefully you feel bad for him. I felt bad for him, but I think studying these passion narrative texts, it hits me because you think like here's the guy that crucified Jesus, like the face of evil. Who in the world would crucify an innocent man? But I think every time I go through Passion Experience or Passion Week, and every time I look at these characters, it just hits me. The face of evil, quote unquote, it feels so common and so relatable. And starting with Pilate, I felt that we went through this in devotions, but I could just relate with Pilate because, we talked about passivity, and you look at Pilate, and I think aside from this moment, you wouldn't think he's a passive guy because he's the governor of Rome. He gets appointed as a leader of this position that's trying to navigate through this tense relationship that he has with this Jewish nation, right? And what a sucky job. Let's just be honest, a sucky job. I mean, these people, they've been a subjugated people for centuries, if not longer, but they also have a history of being really good at rebellions. And so they're always trying to revolt and overthrow every single nation that's been over them. And sometimes they succeeded, like the Maccabean revolt, which is what Hanukkah's about. They actually succeeded. And so that's the entire history. Here's Rome. They placed him here. And they must have placed him here because, one, he's a military man. So he's probably cruel, strong, can make decisions about that kind of stuff. But he's also probably savvy because in the end, they don't want the Israelites to revolt. And so he has to play this tug and pull game. He has to be savvy, navigate all the tensions of the chief priests, the people, as well as his Roman bosses that want him to make sure this revolt doesn't happen. And so basically, he's your typical middle manager. And that's a really bad place to be in. A middle manager at a really bad company with really bad results. And basically the history of it hasn't gone well. That's his position. And if a revolt happens, what happens? He loses his job. Well, actually, more than loses his job, he could actually lose his life. And so he's trying to navigate all of that. But on top of that, here comes this controversial leader. This controversial leader that people are saying is claiming to be the king of the Jews. And then Palm Sunday, which is today, he comes riding in on a donkey with palm branches being waved at him, with people saying, Hosanna, Hosanna, save us. And what are palm branches? They're basically the national symbol of Israel, which is akin to if we wave the bald eagle at someone, wow. And then it's their Independence Day, come, and they're saying, Hosanna, save us, but it's really a political statement. Save us from the Romans. So here's this kind of guy that comes in on top of all the tension, on top of everything that he's navigating through. In other words, it is not a good day to be Pilate. He's got a lot on his plate. And so that's the setting that Pilate's in. That's Pilate. And eventually, they bring Jesus before Pilate. And right off the bat, when you read the text, he starts off with a political question. Are you the king of the Jews? Now, I'm not going to read the whole text again, but what happens? We know Jesus basically judos this interview and says, turns it on him, right? He's the interviewee, but he's like, no, I'm going to be the one who interviews you. And it's interesting because what is he saying? Jesus is challenging Pilate. Is that what you're saying? Or are you just parroting what the people are saying? And so, man, you just get the heart of Jesus right there. Because what is he doing? He's trying to get at Pilate's exact struggle. Are you thinking for yourself, or are you just responding based on other realities like Rome or your bosses, the chief priests and the crowds? So what's Jesus doing here? He's actually trying to personally engage with Pilate. He's trying to invite him into this conversation about truth, about eternity, about kingdom of God, about who he is. But then, what happens? What happens, right? Pilate, he has this response, the most famous response from Pilate. So you are a king. Jesus answered, you say that I am king, for this purpose I was born. And eventually Pilate responds, what is truth? What is truth? There it is, a famous question that Pilate is known for. But it's not an actual question that he's asking, because what does he end up doing? He just ends up walking out on Jesus and going out to the crowds. And I just want to pause here. This break, this empty space right here, this is the moment. This is a key moment in Pilate's life. It's not a rejection, but it's his passive moment. It's his avoidance. Because you kind of get it. Like when Pilate's interacting with Jesus, there is this kind of like aspect of him that gets kind of disturbed. Like, what is this man talking about? Whoa. But then when it comes to, as Jesus is pressing this thing on him, what is truth? He walks out and he avoids it. And why? It's because he just has no room for this question. Like maybe a decade or two ago when he was a middle school boy in the Roman education system learning about these philosophers that are talking about life and purpose and meaning and truth. But now is not the time. A response is costly. There's things I have to deal with, pressures, expectations, deadlines, people to manage. And at this moment, truth isn't urgent, but survival is. And that's why I could resonate and relate with him. And I feel so bad for him. Like there's so much going on in his life. And I don't know, like we're not governors, I guess, of Rome with these people that we're trying to kind of navigate through. But I think a lot of us can say we have a lot on our plates, right? Can I raise it? Who feels like they have a lot on their plates? Come on. And if you don't, you are living a blessed life, all right? But a lot of us have a lot on our plates. It's okay to admit that, right? It's things like, I don't know, like we're just barely treading water in school, all right? Like we're just barely treading water in school. There's exams, there's projects, there's finals, there's part-time jobs. On top of that, there's internship search for the summer, co-op, clubs, friends, social dramas, all that's circulating in our lives. And it just feels like, oh my gosh, I'm barely treading water. And it's in that context that Jesus comes to us and says stuff like, I have come to bear witness and testify to the truth. And you're like, oh gosh, Jesus, truth. Like, I just have a lot going on in my life. I'm just trying to survive. I need to get these things kind of lined up so that I could get that first job out of college. Or I have these people that are depending on me because if I don't get that job, then how am I going to pay off debt and all that stuff? It's just a lot going on. I have no room for truth right now, Jesus. I'm just trying to keep my head above water and survive life. And it just feels like it's the wrong time. It's the wrong time. And so what do? If you're anything like me, when it came to this question, as I was navigating through like life and Christianity and making my decision, you just end up delaying it, putting it off. That's what I did. I just told Jesus, I didn't tell Jesus, I just told myself and told the people that I was having conversation with, right now, I just got a C in my OChem exam, and I'm a pre-med major, and this might submarine me, so can I just focus on this for now? And then once I kind of get my first job out of college set, that's when I'll consider truth. Like later in my life, later is when I'll have more time to consider this stuff. But here's the thing. As a 36-year-old man that's in that phase called later, that most of you consider, it does not get easier, okay? Life does not get simpler. It actually gets a lot harder. Things like job, 9 to 5, taxes, mortgage, marriage. Now I have 2 kids. It's like the only free time I have is from 8 p.m. to like 8:45 p.m. before I start getting sleepy at 8:45 p.m. That's just a reality of life. I don't know if anyway. So then all those late night NCAA watch parties was killing me, okay? Like that was 3 hours past my bedtime. And so life, it does not get simpler. It does not get simpler. There is no less crazy time or simpler time to respond to truth. It probably won't come. And I just want to press you guys right now. Right now, even though it doesn't feel like it, right now is the best time to consider what is truth. Right now is the best time to consider what to do with this person called Jesus. Because if you don't, and you end up delaying, and you end up passively punting that decision off, more often than not, that decision doesn't end up going well. And we see that with Pilate. What does Pilate do? He avoids this question, and it's so interesting. He goes out to this crowd right here. And this dynamic, going in and out of the crowd, this is significant. He does this 7 times. Our text says that he goes in and out 7 times. And that pattern is so rhythmic. He goes in, has a conversation with Jesus. He's like disturbed, or maybe even the first inklings of conviction or consideration. And then he goes out to the crowd, and what happens? He hears the crowd yelling, chanting, calling for this guy's death. And so then what happens? He gets afraid. He feels afraid. But then he goes back, talks to Jesus again, then gets convicted or challenged or disturbed. Then he does it again, and the crowds are getting stronger and stronger. And even though there's this truth from Jesus himself, he's talking truth to him, he can't consider it because the crowd's noise that he keeps on going back out to, it gets louder and louder, and the truth gets quieter and quieter until he can't hear it anymore. In the end, we see his passivity in full force. And what does he do? He actually tries to move the decision off of himself to what? The crowds. He pushes that decision off to the crowds because it's a decision that he just can't seem to make. But he miscalculates, though. He miscalculates because the chief priests, they've basically worked him. They've put these cronies into the crowds. They've riled up the crowds. And when he's trying to get, Barabbas, like, hey, you want to crucify that guy, right? He's a criminal, not this innocent guy. They've riled up the crowds enough that they said no. And then the straw that broke the camel's back, right, for Pilate. If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. Like, oof. They totally press on Pilate's weak point, and it's over for him at this point. And I think for many of us, we're in the exact same position. We know the truth. We've heard enough, but we're stuck in this delay cycle. Why? Because the right response to consider truth is costly. Because what are some of the truths that Jesus is pressing on us today? For some of you, it means letting go of something you know you shouldn't be holding on to. A relationship, an identity, a version of your life you don't want to surrender. For others, it means finally confessing something you've been managing, a sin you've been minimizing, hiding, or justifying. And for some of you, it means stepping into something God has been calling you to do, a hard conversation, a step of obedience, or maybe it's even making that decision to become a Christian. And I think in our best days, in the back of our minds, we know that's all important. But right now, there's this I need to deal with, all this pressure. And so I'm just going to delay it, not now. But here's the miscalculation. And I think it's a miscalculation that a lot of passivity doesn't take into consideration. We think, okay, passivity is just delaying this decision and it's okay. That decision will be there when I come back to it. It's like just a neutral move where it's just like, I'm going to take a step out, and when I come back, I could just consider it again. That was Pilate's miscalculation. He thinks that he can remain above the fray, stay neutral, and then cleanly revisit this again later. He can continue to come to church and hear from God's word and the implications of it all, but then go out into the world and think, okay, later, I'll consider this later. But what's missing in this calculation is what? That there are other players and other people in opposition to Jesus who are savvy and trying to sabotage this entire thing. That's what they're doing, right? Other players who are going to tap into your fears. And that's true of our life. One of them is Satan. We don't want to mince words with that. The prince of the power of the air is that taps into what? Our desires and our fears. Our world is really good at that. It's filled with all of its ads and billboards and tech and social media trying to manipulate you and push you passively, almost subconsciously in a certain direction. And I just want to tell you, I've seen enough people who wonder this 5, 10 years down the line. How in the world did I get here? How in the world did I get here? And a lot of that actually revolves around decisions that they made about their faith. Like they said, right now in college, I'm just going to keep this faith thing peripheral. What is truth peripheral? Christian or non-Christian, they just kind of push that question off to the side, the implications of all of that and how God is calling them to live a certain way or respond a certain way. And in choosing that, what happens? They actually follow the course of this world, this current that our world is pushing them to, which ends up being just a very small, nuclear, family-focused life. And actually, a lot of them end up becoming the kind of Christians they vowed that they would never become when they were an undergrad. Sunday going, that's it. Like, what happened? What happened? Well, it's the result of passivity when it comes to important things, when it comes to things like our faith. Inevitably, that miscalculated decision to remain neutral doesn't end up that way. You always end up finding yourself in a place that you didn't think you would be. And that's exactly what happened to Pilate. This is Pilate's final act in Scripture. So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." He hands an innocent man over to be crucified. And he started that entire conversation probably thinking to himself, I would never do that. But here he is. He does it. He tortures this innocent man, and then he allows this man to die a gruesome death. And in response to that, what does he do? He tries to punt the blame. I am innocent. I am innocent. It's not my fault, in other words. It's not my fault. He washes his hand. It's not my fault. Well, then whose fault is it, Pilate? It's the crowd. It's the chief priests. They were the ones to blame. They're the ones who manipulated me. But you follow that trail, what happens? I think the crowds would say, no, it's not us. It's those dang chief priests who manipulated us, who stirred us up. Chief priests, you go to them, they would say, no, it's Judas. He's the one who betrayed Jesus. And if anything, it's Jesus. He's the one that riled up these people with misplaced expectations that are blasphemous. When I thought about this whole idea of blame, what happens to it? It keeps on getting punted. No one wants to take this blame. No one. But here's the reality. Eventually, the blame has to land somewhere. It has to. Who did it? Whose name is on that dotted line? But then wonder upon wonders, this is where the cross comes in. Because as that blame is circulating, what is the cross? The blame, as we confront our own human sinfulness, that has this face of even something like passivity, something that we could all relate to. Jesus absorbs all of that blame on the cross. You know, in 1941, at Auschwitz, a prisoner escaped from the camp, and in response, in World War II, the Nazis, they enforced a brutal rule. For every man who escaped, 10 others would be chosen to die. That was a rule to prevent escape. So the guards, they lined up the prisoners, and then they started selecting men at random, and then there is that guy that tried to escape. A Polish soldier named, I can't even pronounce his name, Franciszek Gajanowczyk. I'll just call him Fran because I don't want to pronounce it. Anyway, so he was selected, and then when his name was called, though, he completely broke down in front of everyone. He cried out, saying, "My wife and my children, I'll never see them again." It was a moment of raw desperation, and you could feel it, like the weight of death crashing down on him all at once. And then something completely unexpected happened. From the line of prisoners, a small, quiet man stepped forward. A Catholic priest named Maximilian Kolbe. He approached the Nazi officer and said calmly and clearly, "I am a priest. I have no wife and no children. Take me instead." No one asked him to do this. This wasn't his punishment. That wasn't his place, and yet he willingly offered himself in the place of another man. And the officer, surprisingly, they agreed. And so he was taken to a starvation bunker where he was supposed to die in that man's place. Crazy story, but apparently he wouldn't die. So he was 2 weeks in that starvation bunker, and when they imagined that he would be dying on his last threads of life, he was singing hymns and praying all night. Until eventually they said, we have to kill him. And so what did they do? They injected him with a lethal injection, and he died there, having taken the place of a man who would eventually go on to survive the camp and later tell the story of what had happened. This is what it looks like when someone steps in and says, you know what, I'll take that. I'll take that punishment. I'll take that blame. I'll take that place. And even that, this story is just a shadow of what Jesus does on the cross. Because what's Jesus doing? In this whole idea of punting blame, he's actually on the receiving end of wrong blame. It's totally unjustified, totally misplaced. And I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you're blamed wrongly, even for small things. What's the immediate emotional reaction? You feel really angry, like, that is not me. That's unfair. You better apologize for even suggesting that, right? And yet here's Jesus on the receiving end of all this wrong blame. And his response, incredible words. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearer is silent, so he opened not his mouth. He remains silent under false accusations. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't redirect the blame. He doesn't say, this isn't mine. And in this moment, the cycle of blame ends. I'm going to end it here, says Jesus. And that, I don't know if you feel this, but this changes everything. Because the reason we keep punting responsibility is because we know how heavy it is. Can you imagine if Pilate actually confessed honestly, yeah, I murdered and tortured an innocent man who didn't deserve it? That's heavy. Like, who can claim something like that? But the good news of the gospel is, yeah, put that on me. I'll carry it. I'll take that blame. And that's why it's called Amazing Grace. That we don't have to punt and defend and try to justify and rationalize. But the most innocent man ever says, put that all on me. I'll take the blame. You know, in this story, it's incredible for someone like Pilate. He was trying to minister to him to the very end as well, inviting him. Even to the crowds, to the chief priests, to the very end, as he's dying on the cross. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. But I'll take it all on the cross for them. And maybe, yeah, we're not like the people that were there who crucified Jesus, but there are many aspects of their lives that we could resonate with. Every time we choose comfort over obedience or reputation over conviction, we're echoing that same decision. Every time we put off making this decision about Jesus, we're echoing that same decision. And yet, this is the grace. Jesus was dying for Pilate. He was dying for the chief priests. He was dying for the crowds. He was dying for the soldiers who drove in the nails. And that means he was dying for us too. And so we don't have to be afraid anymore. We can actually come to the cross and fully own up to the blame that we want to punt. Because on the cross, Jesus says, I'm going to take that, and it's okay. I'm going to forgive you. I love you, and I'm going to forgive you no matter what you did. You know, this is what we're going to get into in Passion Week. And I'm really excited personally to be able to immerse myself again in what the cross is. It's just like a multifaceted jewel. You know, you could grow up your entire life going to church and you know, Jesus loves me, this I know. The simple songs, it's that simple, they could explain it in that way, but it's so incredible and theologically deep, and the implications are huge that you could spend your entire life studying it and only get just the shallowest glimpse of what this cross means for us. The fact that in our world that's all about blaming and circulating that blame, here's this man that says, I'm going to take it, and he's going to stop that cycle. And when you stop that cycle, what happens? Community, love, generosity, compassion, all that gets permitted in a community. Like, what a thought that this man could end this cycle. Like, that's only one facet that I was struck by as I was studying Pilate. To wrap up, I just wanted to end with this question. This man, Jesus, what will you do with him? What will you do with Jesus? Pilate thought he could deal with it later, but later never came for him. And some of us are doing the exact same thing. We're not rejecting him, but we're just delaying, making some sort of decision, one way or another about him. But here's the thing, delaying your decision about Jesus, that is your decision about Jesus. And one day you might find yourself doing something that you never thought you would. So don't walk away like Pilate. Don't wait for a less busy season that will never come. That moment is now. So what will you do with him? And with that, I wanted to give you guys some time to process. On the bottom half of your handout, there should be some application questions. And I just want you guys to spend some time, maybe not in your whole table, but just pair up and just share. What will you do with Jesus now? If you were honest, what decision have you been postponing with God? What would obedience cost you? What would delay cost you? Have an opportunity to share that in pairs and actually pray for each other. And then afterwards, we'll wrap up our service with our closing song.